Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 33 of GT Masters, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of GT class, or at least GT style, racing and competition spec machines. And some of these episodes feature vehicles which aren't necessarily top tier GT class machines, but they still have some interesting attributes, sometimes advantages, but generally just differences to the more obvious choices. We've featured some already, such as the Lotus Elise race car, and although they're not all that competitive in the grand scheme of things, they do make an interesting change, and they're also usually quite good for one-make racing as well. Now this vehicle is a perfect candidate for one-make racing events, and a very fun one as well. It's the Suzuki Cappuccino Race Car. This is a Polyphony Digital original race car, it's not a real machine, and in terms of overall raw spec, it is the least impressive car in this series. It doesn't have a huge amount of power, it doesn't have an incredible price, it doesn't even have incredible performance, but it's very fun, it has insanely good handling, and it is actually superior to some of the cars in this series in things such as its weight, and, due to that price, its affordability. Now, leading with that price, this car only costs 114 grand, which is very cheap for this series, one of the cheapest in fact. For a Suzuki Cappuccino, though, that's quite a high price. That's around 10 times the price of the regular Cappuccino. So what do you get for that? Well, it's a K car, so it has a small engine. 658cc, and it can be tuned up to 179 horsepower, which is perfectly respectable for such a small engine. It also puts out 162 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty impressive, and it only weighs 590 kilos, which is perhaps even lighter than you might expect it to be, but at the same time, of course, not at all surprising given how tiny this car is. It puts out just over 300 horsepower per tonne, which is pretty respectable, and the PP is perhaps a little bit too high for its own good, but not ridiculously high. It's 502. Certainly workable, and nowhere near as off as the Red Bull Junior is, which has a similar kind of performance, but has a ridiculously high PP. Now, as far as what this car's actually capable of, the straight line performance is, as you'd expect, not exactly worrying to most other GT class machines. What this car is good for is handling. It has incredible grip, regardless of the tyres that you use, fantastic brakes because they have hardly any power and weight to deal with, and due to the fact that the car is not only light, but also extremely compact, that means that you can really fly around tight corners at speeds which GT class machines with 800 or 900 horsepower or even more would really find difficult to match. And on certain circuits, despite the fact that this car has far less power than pretty much anything else in this series, it can actually give a surprising range of these cars a fantastic run for their money, because if you restrict those cars down to the same PP level as this vehicle, those which can get that low of course, they would have a really hard time besting this car, because of course it's all well and good comparing a car in its fully tuned state to other cars in the series, but you have to bear in mind that their fully tuned PP levels are all over the place. Some are right down near 500 like this one, others are up around 700 like the Mercedes SLS and various others. So to compare vehicles as disparate as these can sometimes seem unfair. Now the reason why I would say it's not unfair is because I don't compare them in a strict sense. I don't put them head to head and just base the winner on whichever one wins, because there's more involved in that. There are other things that you have to factor in, such as what it's good for, the value for money, etc. So if you take something like, say, an Audi R8 LMS or a BMW M3 GT2 or the like, and reduce its PP right down to the same level as this car, say 500 for instance, it would have a hard time beating this. especially on a twisty circuit, because those cars would have to be restricted so much to get their PP down this far, because they tend to be around 550, 560 at least. To get them down to this car's level, you're going to be putting out maybe 300, 350 horsepower at best to get those cars to take on this vehicle. And although this only has 179 horsepower to work with, you have to remember it also weighs roughly half the weight, if not better, than many of the other cars here. So this car is actually a lot better against the others in the series than you might think. Now, if you're putting it up against road cars at the 500 pp level, then you will struggle, because many road cars do have amazing performance at that level, such as your Tommy Kairas, your, say, Toyota Sprinter Trunos, your various other vehicles that have really strong performance despite that low spec. This car, though, is a race car, of course, and even though it's a race car, you can fit this car with NOS, which is another significant advantage to keep in mind. Many people don't like to use NOS on race cars, even if they can have it, but it is notable to those who are interested in using it that it can be done on this race car. And of course you can also repaint the car, which is another selling point. So, I wouldn't recommend buying this car, of course, if you want to dominate every racing situation, because of course it's never going to do that. But, for what it's good at, it really is good at it. It's a fantastic car in its own way, and if you haven't bought this race car yet, I would definitely recommend it. It is such a fun and surprisingly competitive and really endearing little race car that it would be a crime, really, to deny yourself the opportunity to enjoy this car. So, that's it overall for this particular review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.